The blood trail wasn't fresh, but it was enough to wake every primal instinct Silas McCade had buried over the years. It cut a ragged line through the dirt near his corral, curved past the barn, and vanished somewhere near the old stone well. He followed it slowly, the butt of his rifle tight against his shoulder, boots crunching dry gravel with every step. This wasn't the first time Silas had tracked a wounded creature across his land. In the 9 years since he'd sworn off society and built a life on the edges of Arizona Territory, he'd seen his fair share of coyotes ripped open by badger claws, deer limping from shattered bones, and once, a mountain lion dragging a broken leg before vanishing into the canyon beyond. But this trail? This wasn't animal. The blood was too thick, too dark, too heavy in the way it splattered and pooled. His heart beat faster. Silas rounded the barn with the quiet grace of a man who used to survive on stealth alone. He was halfway through a crouch when he saw it, just beyond the well, slumped against the worn stone wall. A man. No, not just any man. An Apache. Young, maybe no more than 20, his body twisted awkwardly as if it had collapsed mid-crawl. One hand was pressed tight to his side, blood oozing between his fingers. The other was stretched upward, reaching, desperately, pathetically, toward the wooden bucket suspended just out of reach. Their eyes met. The Apache's were dark and fierce, even through the pain. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just stared, like a man measuring how long it would take Silas to pull the trigger. If you grab the gun like Silas probably did, comment 1. But if you're curious about what really happened next and how that choice changed everything, then hit follow. Because true Western stories are full of surprises. Silas didn't. Not because he didn't want to, but because something froze him. Something deeper than instinct or fear. A memory from long ago. The summer of '46, when the rains failed and the Rio San Miguel turned to dust. He remembered that feeling, how every breath scraped his throat like sandpaper, how he'd prayed for death or mercy. And that was what he saw now. Not a savage, not an enemy, but a human being dying. Silas lowered the rifle. The Apache's hand dropped back to his side. Slowly, methodically, Silas unslung the satchel he always kept strapped to his saddle. From it, he pulled a narrow tin flask, not water, but something sharper, an herbal tincture he'd brewed himself from wild sage, juniper bark, and the roots of desert thorn. It was bitter but potent. It numbed pain, slowed bleeding. He unscrewed the cap, knelt by the injured man, and touched the flask to his lips. The Apache flinched, then drank. 3 gulps, then a cough, blood flecking his lips. Silas stayed with him, watching the muscles in the man's throat move as the liquid went down. When the Apache leaned back, gasping, Silas wiped the rim of the flask and slipped it back into his bag. "You're lucky," he muttered, more to himself than the other. "Any other rancher would have left you for the buzzards." The Apache tried to speak. Nothing came. His lips moved again, this time barely a whisper. "More comes." Silas frowned. "What?" The man coughed again, then raised his trembling hand, pointing, westward, toward the far ridge. Then, with effort, he dragged his thumb across his neck. Message received. Danger was coming. Silas glanced back toward the horizon. Dust, a faint trail, low, wide, horses, fast. He turned back to the Apache, whose body had gone slack again, the makeshift medicine fighting for time against blood loss. Damn it, this wasn't what Silas wanted. He didn't sign up for another man's war. Didn't care which tribe he belonged to or what bounty might be on his head. All he knew was this: if those riders found this man here, he was as good as dead. And maybe Silas, too. He stood quickly, boots digging into the dirt. His mind raced. There wasn't time to move him far. The barn was too obvious. The house, no chance. But the root cellar. Tucked behind the far end of the barn, half buried beneath scrub and dry timber, it had once stored potatoes. Now it held dust, emptiness, and maybe, just maybe, salvation. He crouched again. "Can you walk?" No answer. He reached under the man's arms and gently, carefully, pulled him upright. The Apache groaned but didn't scream. Good. Half carrying, half dragging, Silas moved fast, every heartbeat echoing louder than the last. The hoofbeats were close now, maybe a mile off. He shoved the root cellar door open with his boot and laid the Apache down inside on the dirt floor. Grabbed an old horse blanket, threw it over the body. Not ideal, but better than nothing. He stood again, breathing hard. Just as the first rifle gleamed in the afternoon sun. 6 riders. Leading them, Sheriff Edgar Boone, and he wasn't coming for a friendly chat. Sheriff Edgar Boone rode like a man with judgment in his pocket and fire in his holsters. 6 riders crested the western ridge, their silhouettes cutting sharp against the sinking sun. Dust billowed around their hooves as they descended, fast and wide, in a pattern no rancher could mistake for neighborly. This was no patrol, no passing travelers. This was a search party with intent. Silas stood alone by the well, his rifle slung awkwardly across his shoulder, one hand gripping a weathered fence post. He forced his expression neutral, like a man fixing a board, minding his own damn business. Inside, the root cellar warrior lay still beneath the horse blanket, breath shallow, blood still wet beneath him. Boone pulled up first. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sun-scorched face and a trimmed mustache that made him look more dignified than he deserved. His badge caught the last rays of sunlight. The horse beneath him snorted, restless, sensing the tension its rider didn't bother to hide. "Evening, McCray," Boone said, voice lazy as molasses. "Heard trouble came your way." Silas squinted up at him, pretending confusion. "Trouble?" "Trail of blood cut through Nelson's Gulch, heads toward your land." Boone scanned the area behind Silas, eyes narrowing on the barn, the well, the dark stain in the dirt barely covered with scattered straw. His deputies fanned out, circling the yard slowly, hands resting on gun belts, eyes sharp. Silas shrugged. "Been out fixin' fence line all day, didn't notice anything." Boone smiled, the kind of smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Strange, that sure looks like blood there." He pointed with the barrel of his rifle. "Fresh, too, unless your cattle been bleedin' into your drinkin' water." Silas didn't move. Behind him, just under the edge of the well, something shifted. A breeze? A foot? He didn't know. But Boone's head cocked, his eyes darted. For a heartbeat, it seemed everything would fall apart. Then a voice, raw and quiet, cut through the air. Not English, Apache. The syllables flowed like a broken river, rough but musical, soft yet certain. Every man froze. Boone's eyes went wide. Silas's stomach dropped. The sheriff dismounted slowly, boots crunching gravel. He took 3 steps forward, stopping just 10 feet away. For the first time, Silas saw the mask slip. Boone's usual arrogance replaced by something else entirely. Recognition. He looked past Silas now, gaze fixed on the well. "Dear God," Boone muttered, "it's him." The deputies exchanged glances, nervous, confused. Boone turned, his voice hushed but sharp. "Nobody moves. Keep your hands where I can see them." Then to Silas, "Do you know who that is down there?" Silas said nothing. Boone stepped even closer, whispering now, "That ain't just some Apache fugitive. That's Nantan, son of Chief Nahuel, the one who forged the Whitaker Treaty last spring." Silas blinked. He'd heard of Nantan. Everyone had. The peacemaker. The warrior who'd convinced his father's council to seek truce instead of war. He was supposed to be a diplomat, a bridge between worlds. So why was he bleeding to death in Silas McCade's root cellar? Boone's jaw tightened. "He's wanted for murder," he said. "Colonel Whitaker, ambushed 3 days ago, shot in the back." By him? Boone dozed. "That's what the report says." But even as he spoke, Silas could see doubt flicker in the sheriff's eyes. Something didn't add up, and Boone knew it. Silas kept his voice even. "He didn't look like a killer when I found him." Boone's hand moved toward his gun. "He's a liar, a manipulator. Savages always have a story." Inside the cellar, Nantan coughed again, this time louder. Then he spoke, clear, firm, in English. "They ambushed us, painted to look like my people, but they weren't Apache." Goon went still. The deputies looked to each other. "Who were they?" Silas asked. Nantan's voice trembled, but the words came strong. "White men, speaking broken Apache, masked with war paint, waiting exactly where Whitaker told me to meet him." Silas's blood ran cold. Boone didn't respond, not yet. But his fingers curled tight around the grip of his revolver, and from the look in his eyes, Silas could tell. This wasn't just law anymore. This was cover-up. And the truth had just crawled out of the dirt to bite. Did you see that coming? The truth is rarely simple in the Wild West. Have you ever uncovered a hidden truth that changed everything? Share your story in the comments. The plot thickens, and there's an even bigger twist ahead. Don't stop now. Keep reading to see how this incredible true Wild West story unfolds. Sheriff Boone didn't speak right away. He just stood there, boots planted firm in the dirt, staring at the root cellar like it was a coffin he'd just watched open. Around them, the other deputies shifted uneasily. 5 men caught between duty and dread, hands hovering close to their weapons, eyes flicking between their lawman and the wounded man none of them had expected. Deputy Eli Booker spit into the dirt and grunted. "What's he saying, Sheriff?" Boone didn't answer. Silas McCade did. "He says the men who shot him weren't Apache." Booker scowled. "Hell's that mean?" Nantan, lying just beneath the cellar door, summoned what little strength he had and raised his voice. "I mean, Colonel Whitaker wasn't killed by my people. He was murdered by men pretending to be us, men who knew exactly where we'd be meeting." Boone's mouth was a hard line. He finally turned to his deputies. "Back up. Form a circle. I don't want anyone getting jumpy." They obeyed, though warily. Deputy Sam Carter, the youngest among them, looked pale. Sweat beaded along his brow as he loosened the strap on his holster but didn't draw. Boone paced, slow and deliberate, his gaze never leaving Silas. "You don't know what you've gotten yourself into, McCray. That man is the most wanted fugitive in the territory. There's a bounty the size of a ranch on his head, dead or alive." Silas didn't flinch. "You think I care about bounty? I gave him medicine because he was dying, that's all." Boone's eyes narrowed. "That's enough to hang you for aiding a fugitive. And if what he's saying is true, you're now tangled in something bigger than either of us." Nantan spoke again, softer this time. "They'll kill anyone who helps me, anyone who believes me. That's how this works." Silas glanced down at him. The man's face was pale, drawn, but his eyes burned with that same stubborn fire, truth sharpened by pain. "You got proof?" Silas asked. Nantan nodded weakly. "Satchel, at my belt." Silas reached beneath the blanket and carefully pulled a leather pouch from the warrior's side. Inside was a folded map, smudged with blood and sweat. He unfolded it slowly. What he saw chilled him. Shipping routes, names, locations, schedules, dozens of entries, all tied to government supplies and military shipments. The markings told a story. Someone was rerouting weapons, selling them, not to tribes, to settlers, mercenaries, anyone willing to pay. Boone saw it too. His face went still, too still. He took a step closer. "Give me that." Silas held it back. "No." Boone's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're looking at. I know this map lists your name. Twice." That did it. Boone's hand twitched toward his sidearm, but stopped. Not out of fear, out of calculation. He looked over his shoulder at his men, weighing something heavy. Then, suddenly, he smiled. The mask returned. "You're playing a dangerous game, McRae." "I'm not playing anything." Behind Boone, Deputy Sam Carter stepped forward, hesitant. "Sheriff, if this is true..." Boone turned on him like a whip crack. "You shut your damn mouth, Carter." But the seed had been planted. Booker frowned. "You sure this bounty's about justice, boss?" Boone glared at him. "You questioning orders now, too?" "It just seems convenient. A peace talker gets framed for murder, and now we're all riding to kill him before he can speak." Nanton, still lying under the blanket, coughed hard and spoke again. "They want me dead before I reach my father's council tomorrow. That's when the treaty expands to all southern tribes. That's what they're afraid of." Boone's face twitched. He hadn't expected this much resistance. Not from his own men, not from a rancher with no stake in the war. But the map, the words, the doubt, it was spreading. Silas stepped forward now, shoulder squared. "So, what's your play, Sheriff? You gonna shoot him here, in front of your own men? In front of witnesses?" Boone sneered. "No witnesses if no one's left standing." The words dropped like stones into a dry well. A threat, a warning, and maybe a promise. Suddenly, the world around Silas felt sharper. The silence more brittle. He could see it in Boone's stance, the way he shifted weight to his back leg, the tightening of his jaw, the flick of fingers near his holster. The man wasn't going to back down. He was going to bury the truth in gunfire. Unless something changed. Unless someone stopped him. And Silas, against every instinct he'd ever trusted, realized that someone might have to be him. The dusk was deepening now, shadows stretching across the dusty yard like the long arms of consequence. Silas McRae stood his ground, the blood-stained map still in his hand, while Sheriff Boone radiated the kind of tension that made wolves back away from the carcass. Behind the two men, Boone's deputies shifted like uneasy horses, unsure whether to draw steel or stay silent. But Nanton, still lying hidden just inside the root cellar, spoke again. "Sheriff Boone was there," he said, voice hoarse. "Or at least, he knew what was coming. I saw the aftermath in his eyes." Boone snapped his gaze downward. "You callin' me a traitor, savage? I'm calling you a man who profits from war." That did it. Boone stormed forward, hand flying to his pistol, but Deputy Sam Carter stepped between them, both hands up, palms open. "Wait, Sheriff, don't." Boone froze. Carter looked back at Silas, then down at Nanton. "I want to hear the rest." Boone's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop Carter. Nanton forced himself up on one elbow, groaning with effort. Blood soaked the fabric beneath him, but his voice came with more strength now, gravelly, steady. 3 days ago, I was summoned to a neutral ground by Colonel Whitaker. We'd been working to expand the treaty, bring in southern tribes, end the raids, set clear boundaries. It would have ended half the violence in this territory overnight. Silas listened, the details snapping into focus like puzzle pieces fitting into place. We met at the mesa, Nantan continued, halfway between Fort Breck and the reservation lines. My father had sent 2 other warriors with me, unarmed, ceremonial. We brought treaty documents, sealed and blessed. He coughed, wiped blood from his lip. But Whitaker never got a word out. The ambush came before he even dismounted. Painted faces, some Apache markings, some not. But the accents were wrong. The rifles, U.S. Army issue. The kill shots, precise, professional. Silas felt the chill climb his spine. They made it look like an Apache betrayal, Nantan said. Left the body scattered, burned the map, scattered arrowheads and feathers. Anyone stumbling onto that scene would think it was us. Boone's face was stone. But Carter glanced at the other deputies. Booker looked troubled. Even Eli shifted on his heels. Nantan wasn't finished. I took a bullet, ran, hid in the canyons. Got this far before I passed out. McCray found me, gave me medicine, and now here we are. Silas held up the map again. This says you were right. Every shipment rerouted, all under Boone's signature. Boone stepped forward again. That map proves nothing. It's hearsay, a tribal lie. Colonel Whitaker wrote a letter, Nantan cut in, the night before the ambush. He suspected something. Gave me the letter in case he didn't return. He reached for the pouch at his side again. Silas helped him extract a folded parchment, stained and creased, but intact. He handed it to Carter, who read aloud. If anything happens to me, know this. Someone inside the marshal's office is selling arms, destabilizing this treaty. My gut says Boone. He's been too eager to delay, too eager to blame. If I don't come back, give this to Fort Prescott. Tell them the peace was real, and the betrayal came from within. Silence. Total. No one moved. Carter swallowed. Boone's lips peeled back into a snarl. You're all fools. That could have been written by anyone. Except it's signed by Whitaker, Carter said. Forged. Silas snapped. With what? Apache ink? Tribal seals? Army-grade parchment? Booker chimed in now, hesitant but firm. Sheriff, remember that shipment 3 months back? The rifles that vanished? I saw one of those rifles last week, in a settler camp down south. Same serial number etched right into the buttstock. Boone whirled on him. What the hell are you saying? I'm saying maybe Nantan ain't the only one with a story. A crack began to form. Not in the earth, in the deputies' formation, in their trust, their loyalty. Nantan's voice, still low, still resolute, pressed the advantage. The men who killed Whitaker weren't Indians. They were men like you, paid off by those who need war, ranchers, weapon traders, corrupt officials. A dozen names on that map. Some I can't read, some I can. Silas glanced at the corner of the parchment. There it was, a payment ledger, dates, amounts, signatures, and one name circled twice, E. Boone. The sheriff's eyes dropped to it, then rose again, empty of denial. No fury, no excuses, just cold certainty. He drew his gun, but he didn't aim at Nantan. He pointed it at Silas. You helped him. That makes you an accomplice, maybe worse. Silas didn't move. You gonna shoot a man for telling the truth? I've done worse for less, Boone growled. Then, from behind, a second click echoed. Deputy Carter. His revolver was drawn, pointed at Boone. You fire that weapon, Sheriff, and I'll put you down myself. Boone turned, stunned, Then, enraged, "Put that down, Sam." But Sam didn't. Neither did Booker, nor Eli. Within seconds, 4 deputies had turned their weapons on the man they once followed. Only one remained unmoved, Hawkins, grizzled and grim, his loyalty carved deeper than reason. "This is mutiny," Boone hissed. "No," Carter replied. "This is justice catching up." Boone's gun trembled in his hand. "You think anyone in Prescott will believe this savage over me?" Silas took a slow step forward, the map still in hand. "They don't need to believe him." He raised the parchment. "They only need to read this." Boone's world, the power, the influence, the control, crumbled around him, and all he had left was a revolver and a rapidly disappearing sense of invincibility. The lines are drawn. Loyalty, justice, and betrayal collide in this intense moment. What's the most surprising turn you've ever witnessed or experienced? Let us know in the comments. Hawkins stepped forward, his boots grinding the dirt like gravel under a plow. The man had a face like old bark, creased and sunbeaten, his eyes dull with long years of blind obedience. He didn't draw his gun, not yet, but his hand hovered near it, fingers twitching like they were already deciding. "You boys don't know what you're doing," he growled. "That treaty, it's a sham. Just buys time for them to circle their wagons, sharpen their knives. My brother died with an arrow in his gut from one of their kind." "No," Nanton rasped from beneath the cellar door. "Your brother died because men like Boone made sure the raids never stopped, because peace doesn't sell rifles." That hit harder than any bullet. Boone, seeing his authority collapse like rotted timber, snarled and raised his pistol higher. "Last chance," he hissed. "Drop your weapons, all of you." No one moved. No one blinked. Even Hawkins now looked unsure, his lips pressed into a line as tight as his grip. Boone's eyes jumped from face to face. What he saw wasn't rebellion. It was decision, and he was on the wrong side of it. He shifted, trying to pivot, to take Nanton out with a single shot, end the problem before it became history. But the moment his body tensed, Silas stepped in front of him again. "I wouldn't," Silas said, voice low, calm. Boone spat into the dirt. "You really think this ends with a letter? With some tribal kid and a few soft-hearted deputies? You think they'll listen to him in Prescott, in Washington?" Silas didn't move. "I think if you pull that trigger, we'll never know." Boone's hand twitched. Then, without warning, a sound split the air. Not gunfire, a song. Soft, low, haunting. Nantan was singing, not in English, not for any of them, but the words carried weight beyond meaning. An Apache melody, old and powerful, filled with memory and mourning, woven from dust and blood and survival. His voice, weak but unwavering, rose like wind through canyon walls. And the land listened. The air seemed to still. Even Boone froze, his weapon hovering mid-breath. Silas felt the sound in his chest, in his teeth. It wasn't just music. It was message. It was legacy. Boone's deputies stared, unmoving, until, suddenly, hoofbeats. Far off at first, then closer, faster, many, too many. Boone turned toward the horizon, pale beneath the dust and sweat. They came over the ridge like the rising edge of a storm. 24 Apache riders, moving in silent formation, war paint vivid against the dying light. They made no sound, no battle cries, no charge, just
Presence. Undeniable. Nantan's song tapered into silence. Silas turned to Boone, who now stood frozen in place, pistol trembling. "What now, Sheriff?" Boone didn't answer. The Apache riders fanned out, forming a loose circle around the property, firm but not threatening. At their center rode an elder, gray-braided hair threaded with eagle feathers, posture straight as a rifle barrel. He dismounted with slow dignity and walked toward the root cellar. Chief Nahuel, father of Nantan, leader of the southern tribes, peace broker. Silas stepped aside as the chief approached. He said nothing at first, just knelt beside his son, placed his hands gently on the blood-soaked bandages, and whispered words only they understood. Nantan nodded, barely. Then the chief stood and faced Boone. "You came to kill my son," he said in flawless English. Boone opened his mouth, closed it. Nahuel gestured toward the map in Silas's hand. "He carries truth. That's more than you ever did." Boone's mask cracked. "You don't understand the stakes," he growled.
"You're letting your people be tricked by a boy who—"
"He is more of a man than you will ever be," the chief replied.
Silas saw Boone's hand twitch again. The man was unraveling. All his power, all his authority burned up in a single day. He made a final move, raising his pistol toward Chief Nahuel. But before he could fire, Silas tackled him. They hit the dirt in a tumble of fists and fury, the gun flying from Boone's hand. Boone roared, swinging wild, but Silas caught him hard in the gut and knocked the wind out of him. The deputies rushed in. Carter and Booker wrestled Boone off Silas, pinning him down. Eli scooped up the pistol and stepped back, breathing hard. Boone lay gasping in the dirt, his power gone. Hawkins stood apart, hands still on his gun, but didn't draw, didn't move, didn't speak. He'd seen which way the wind had turned. The Apache warriors never broke formation, never needed to. Their message had arrived with their presence. The silence afterward wasn't empty, it was full of finality. The war that almost was had just been undone. By a letter, by a song, by one man who dared to give another medicine at a well. Silas McCade sat in the dust, his breath coming in shallow bursts. His knuckles throbbed, his shirt was torn, and Boone's blood stained his sleeve. But he was alive, and so was Nantan. Around them, the world held still. No gunshots, no cries for war, just the thrum of tension and something else, something older. The Apache war party remained mounted in a wide circle around the ranch yard. Not one rider had drawn a weapon. Their restraint wasn't weakness, it was discipline. They were warriors, but they were also witnesses. Chief Nahuel raised his hand. His warriors dismounted as one, like a single organism responding to breath. They formed a semicircle behind him, flanking Silas, Boone, and the downed deputies. No one moved toward aggression. It wasn't necessary. Noel approached Boone's crumpled form, now bound and pinned beneath the watchful eyes of Deputy Carter and Booker. "You believed yourself untouchable," Noel said calmly, "that your law made you a god among men. But your law is written in ink. Our truth is carved in memory." Boone didn't respond. His lips twitched, but no words came. He looked smaller now, shrunken, like a man who'd glimpsed his legacy and found it rotten. Chief Noel turned away from him. He walked slowly to Silas, still seated by the well. The chief studied him, not with suspicion, with curiosity. "You could have walked away," he said, "left my son to bleed into your land and vanish like so many before him. Why didn't you?" Silas wiped sweat from his brow. "I saw a man," he said, "not an Indian, not a fugitive, just a man trying to live. Noel's face remained unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he knelt. The chief of the Apache Nation, feared and respected across 1,000 miles, bent one knee in front of a white rancher. He placed both hands on Silas's shoulders. He spoke in Apache. The warriors behind him echoed with a low murmur of approval, a kind of chant, a ceremonial hum that vibrated through the ground and the bones. Nantan, weak but watching, translated. He says you are now brother to our people, not by blood, but by action. You have chosen honor when fear would have been easier. You have seen with clear eyes what others refuse to. For this, you are one of us. Silas stared, stunned. The chief stood. He gestured to one of the warriors, who stepped forward carrying a long object wrapped in worn buffalo hide. With great care, the warrior unwrapped it. It was a beaded ceremonial necklace, bone and turquoise, interwoven with eagle feathers, worn smooth with age. Noel held it before Silas. "This belonged to my father," he said, "and his father before him.
It has never been worn by anyone outside our bloodline." Silas's hands trembled as the necklace was placed around his neck. It was more than a gift. It was a bond. The Apache stepped forward one by one. Each touched Silas's hand, not in greeting, but in acknowledgement, in kinship. When Nantan was helped from the root cellar and brought beside him, leaning weakly against one of his brothers, the two men met each other's gaze. "You gave me medicine," Nantan said, "but you gave the territory something greater, hope." Silas offered a tired smile. "I just did what was right." Nantan nodded. "And sometimes that's enough to change the course of history." From behind, Carter approached. "We've wired Fort Prescott. There'll be an investigation. You've got enough evidence to bury half the territory's corruption, but it won't come without blowback." Silas looked around at the Apache warriors, the fading sun, the quiet that settled like dust after a storm. "Let 'em come," he said. "This land's seen too much silence bought with blood. It's time we let the truth speak." As twilight deepened, the two sides, Apache and settler, stood not as enemies, not as wary strangers, but as something far rarer on the frontier: allies, brothers. The stars had begun to pierce through the veil of twilight when the sound of new riders shattered the calm. From the southern trail came two soldiers in uniform, dust-covered and wary-eyed, leading a third rider burdened with saddle packs full of documents and dispatch scrolls. The lead soldier, Sergeant Graves, called out before dismounting. "We came from Fort Prescott," he said, stepping into the ring of warriors and lawmen, responding to a priority wire. "Who's in command here?" All eyes shifted to Chief Nahul, but it was Silas who stepped forward, the necklace of turquoise and bone still hanging from his neck. "That depends," he said calmly. "You looking to enforce truth or bury it?" Graves scanned the crowd, noted the tied-up figure of Sheriff Boone, bloodied and silent in the dust. Then he saw Nantan, bandaged, weak but upright, standing with his people. "We came for truth," Graves replied. Deputy Carter handed over the letter signed by Colonel Whitaker, the map of corrupted supply routes, and the ledger with Boone's name circled in ink. The sergeant read each slowly, his face growing darker with every line. Behind him, the third rider, a man in civilian attire, stepped forward. "I'm Elias Warren," he said, "legal advisor to the governor. This is more than bounty hunting. This is treason, armed conspiracy, government subversion." He glanced down at Boone. "I've seen enough." Graves gave the order. Boone and Hawkins were hauled to their feet, shackled and stripped of their badges. Hawkins tried to protest, muttering about lies and bribes, but no one listened.
The Apache warriors didn't move, but the weight of their stares followed the disgraced sheriff like a curse. "You can't do this," Boone growled at Warren as he was led toward the waiting horses. "You don't know what I've done for this territory." Warren's reply was cold. "You've done enough." The rest unfolded quickly, methodically. Witness statements were taken, evidence was packed and sealed. Warrants would be issued for others implicated in the documents, names of ranchers, military officers, and traders who had fueled the war from the shadows, lining their pockets with blood. But the reckoning wasn't complete until one final question was asked. Warren turned to Chief Nahul. "Will your son testify before the territorial court?" Nahul didn't answer. He looked at Nantan. The young warrior, still pale and leaning slightly for balance, nodded. "Yes," he said, "but not as a prisoner." Warren didn't hesitate. "As a witness, as a diplomat, as a citizen of peace." There was a subtle murmur from both the Apache and the deputies, a kind of shared recognition that something monumental had just occurred.
For decades, the Apache had been seen only as enemies or obstacles. Now one of them would help bring down a network of corruption inside the very structure that once hunted him. Nantan stepped forward, addressing the circle of both allies and former foes. "Justice doesn't come from bullets, it comes from truth. And if I die tomorrow, let it be known that I died trying to protect peace, not start another war." Graves saluted him, a real salute, not one of pity or obligation, but respect. "Your word will be heard," he said, "and believed." Boone spat into the dirt. "You'll regret this. Sooner or later, men like me always come back." Silas, arms folded, watched him with steady eyes. "Then we'll be ready." The riders from Fort Prescott took Boone and Hawkins away, vanishing down the trail under a canopy of stars. Behind them, the air felt cleaner, like a storm had passed, not just across the land, but through every heart still standing in that yard. The Apache began to pack up. Quiet efficiency, purposeful motion. Nantan lingered beside Silas. "You saved my life," he said again. "You saved something bigger than both of us," Silas replied. "I just put a splinter in the machine." Nantan smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's all it takes to break the gears." Before returning to his horse, he looked toward the well, where Silas had first found him, bleeding, half dead, hand outstretched not for a weapon, but for water. "Funny," he said, "how peace always seems to begin in the simplest places." Silas nodded. "Or with the simplest choices." And in that moment, stripped of flags, badges, and borders, they were just two men. Warrior, rancher, survivors, and now, brothers. By dawn, the Apache riders were ready to leave. The war paint had been washed away with river water gathered in silence under the pale sky. Horses were brushed and fed, saddles checked, arrows re-wrapped in hide. Not for battle, but for ceremony. A different kind of journey was about to begin. Silas McCade stood near the well, the same place he had found Nantan bleeding out just one day earlier. His ranch, for the first time in years, wasn't silent. Voices mingled in Apache and English. Laughter rang from children who had arrived with the tribe's medicine woman to check on Nantan's wound. Somewhere near the barn, Deputy Carter was speaking with two young warriors about shooting stances and frontier rifles. It didn't look like peace. It felt like it. Chief Noel approached Silas once more, this time without the gravity of trial or tension. "You are a man who walked into danger without asking for reward," he said. "That is the kind of man our ancestors speak of in fire stories." Silas tried to wave it off. "I just helped someone who needed it." But the chief wasn't finished. "When we tell stories of the old ones," he continued, "we do not speak of how many they killed or how far they rode. We speak of those who stood in front of harm for others." He nodded toward the warriors, now forming a ceremonial half-circle near the center of the yard. "Today, we honor you as one of our own." Silas blinked.
But words failed. Noel gestured for him to follow. The circle parted, and in the middle stood Nantan, bandaged, pale, but proud. His chin was lifted, eyes steady displayed exhaustion. He carried something long wrapped in black cloth, a war lance. As Silas stepped into the circle, a hush fell. Nantan unwrapped the lance slowly. Feathers hung from its shaft, still dusted with the clay of northern lands. The wood was carved with symbols Silas didn't understand, but he could feel their age, their weight. "This was my grandfather's," Nantan said, "and his father's before him. It has never left our bloodline. Until now." He held the lance out, both hands open. Silas stared. "This is too much," he said quietly. "No," Nantan replied. "This is exactly right." Silas took the lance. It felt alive in his grip.
Not just an object, but a trust passed down through generations. One by one, the warriors stepped forward. Each pressed their palm to his chest, murmuring words he didn't understand, but somehow did. He felt them, not as syllables, but as meaning, as recognition. Brother, protector, witness. When the last warrior had passed, Nahuel raised both hands and spoke aloud. "Let it be known, from this day forward, Silas McCade walks with the Apache. His name will be sung not as outsider, but as bridge between worlds. As a man who chose truth when lies were easy, mercy when revenge was expected." Silas felt something shift inside him, not pride, something older, something sacred. The ceremony closed in quiet prayer, the warriors returning to their horses, mounting without haste, without flourish. This wasn't an ending, it was a continuation of peace, extended by courage and sustained by choice. Before riding off, Nantan rode his horse beside Silas one last time. "I'll see you again," he said. Silas smirked. "Hopefully not bleeding in my yard." Nantan chuckled. "I'll try not to make it a habit." They clasped hands, forearm to forearm. Not goodbye, not even farewell, just recognition. The Apache rode out like mist from the hills, quiet, certain, real. And Silas stood in the dust, war lance in hand, the wind brushing through his hair like the memory of everything that had changed. Not just for him, for the entire territory, and for the story that would be told long after their names had faded. A week later, Silas McCade stood in front of a crowded courthouse in Fort Prescott, his ranch clothes cleaned but still dust-stained, the ceremonial Apache necklace tucked under his collar like a secret only a few could truly understand. The trial of Edgar Boone and Eli Hawkins had begun. The evidence was overwhelming. Colonel Whitaker's handwritten letter, the smuggling ledger, testimonies from Deputy Carter and the other men who once served under Boone.
And most powerful of all, Nantan's testimony. He stood before the court without shame, speaking calmly and clearly, recounting every step of the ambush, every false accusation, every corrupt transaction meant to ignite another war. He offered no hatred, only truth. The room held its breath when he finished. Boone's lawyer attempted to discredit the evidence, calling it circumstantial, calling Nantan's statement unreliable due to cultural bias. But the tide had turned. The jury saw the map. They heard the soldiers confirm the serial numbers on stolen rifles. They watched Boone's smirk fade into silence. Guilty of treason, of conspiracy, of attempted murder. Boone didn't look at anyone as the sentence was passed. Hawkins only shook his head and muttered about how this never would have happened 10 years ago. They were led away in chains. History would remember them not as protectors of the peace, but as merchants of war. News spread quickly across the territory. Settlers who once feared Apache raids now read headlines about shared treaties, weapon smugglers in uniform, and a rancher named Silas McCade who had risked his life for a wounded stranger.
Peace didn't blossom overnight, but something had shifted. Meetings began, open, public gatherings between tribal leaders and town sheriffs. Land agreements were renegotiated, trade routes were redrawn. For the first time, white and native families broke bread under the same rooftops. Silas's ranch became more than a patch of land. It became a meeting point, a symbol. Where once there was silence, now there were stories. Apache elders visited the well. Tribal children played in the corral. Travelers passed through not in fear, but with curiosity. And Silas? He remained the same man in many ways, quiet, guarded, plain-spoken. But there was a new steadiness in his eyes, a purpose not born of survival, but of belonging. One afternoon, Deputy Carter rode out to visit. He brought with him a stack of letters from soldiers, families, strangers across the territory. "Seems folks think you're some kind of legend," he said. Silas just chuckled. "I gave a man medicine." Carter leaned back in the saddle. "Yeah, and you helped stop a war." Silas didn't answer. He just looked at the well, the place where it all began, the circle where a man's hand had reached up, not for vengeance, but for help. The Arizona sun was beginning to set again, casting long golden rays across the open land. Silas McCade stood at the edge of his well, staring down into the cool darkness below. The same spot where it had all started, where a wounded Apache had reached for help, where Silas had made a choice that would echo far beyond this quiet stretch of land. He knelt slowly, as if by instinct, and dipped a tin cup into the water. It came up clear and cold, smooth as glass in the fading light. He stared at it for a long time before taking a slow sip. Behind him, footsteps approached. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. Nantan's voice was soft. "You never did let me thank you properly." Silas rose and handed him the cup. "No need," he said. "Just glad you made it back." Nantan drank, smiling faintly as the water touched his lips. "We leave for Santa Fe tomorrow," he said, "to formalize the treaty's expansion. Every tribe from the southern hills to the northern ridges will be included." "Think it'll hold?" Silas asked. Nantan looked out over the horizon, where dusk kissed the earth like an old friend. "I think people are tired of bleeding." Silas nodded. "Yeah, me too." They stood in silence for a moment, two men from different worlds who'd shared a battlefield of conscience and found common ground. Then Nantan said, "Do you know what my people will call this place in our stories?" Silas raised an eyebrow. "Something hard to pronounce, I reckon." Nantan laughed. "Maybe, but it means the Well of Mercy. They'll tell their children that peace began here, because a man chose compassion over fear." Silas scratched the back of his neck. "Wasn't trying to start peace. I was just trying to keep a man from dying." "And that," Nantan replied, "is exactly how peace begins." The words settled between them, warm and weighty. Nantan offered his hand again, firm, steady, no longer weak with blood loss or burden. Silas took it without hesitation. "You ever need help," Silas said, "this ranch is open." Nantan nodded. "And if you ever ride north, you'll find you're not just a rancher in Apache lands, you're kin." With that, he turned and walked toward his waiting horse, where a small group of riders had gathered for the journey ahead. One by one, they nodded to Silas, not as a stranger, not even as a hero, but as one of their own. Silas watched them disappear into the distance, the dust rising behind their hooves like soft thunder. Then he turned back to the well and smiled. Because in a world where history had often been written in fire and blood, it was this moment, this quiet sip of water between former enemies, that he'd remember. And maybe, just maybe, others too. Because sometimes the world doesn't change through war. Sometimes it changes through one small act of decency. One hand extended.
1 cup of water. Great! Here's the extended ending, designed to naturally draw the audience in and create anticipation for a part 2. Dawn broke, and the Apache warriors were ready to depart. War paint had been washed away with river water gathered in silence under the pale sky. Horses were brushed and fed, saddles checked, arrows re-wrapped in hide, not for battle, but for ceremony. A different kind of journey was about to begin. Silas McCade stood near the well, the very spot where he'd found Nanton bleeding out just a day earlier. His ranch, for the first time in years, wasn't silent. Voices mingled in Apache and English. Laughter rang from children who had arrived with the tribe's medicine woman to check on Nanton's wound. "You ever need help?" Silas said. "This ranch is open." Nanton nodded. "And if you ever ride north, you'll find you're not just a rancher in Apache lands, you're kin."
Somewhere near the barn, Deputy Carter was speaking with 2 young warriors about shooting stances and frontier rifles. It didn't look like peace. It felt like it. Chief Nahuel approached Silas once more, this time without the gravity of trial or tension. "You are a man who walked into danger without asking for reward," he said. "That is the kind of man our ancestors speak of in fire stories." Silas tried to wave it off. "I just helped someone who needed it." But the chief wasn't finished. "When we tell stories of the old ones," he continued, "we don't speak of how many they killed or how far they rode. We speak of those who stood in front of harm for others." He nodded toward the warriors, now forming a ceremonial half-circle near the center of the yard. "Today, we honor you as one of our own." Silas blinked. But words failed him. Nahuel gestured for him to follow. The circle parted, and in the middle stood Nanton, bandaged, pale, but proud. His chin was lifted, eyes steady despite exhaustion. He carried something long wrapped in black cloth, a war lance. As Silas stepped into the circle, a hush fell. Nanton unwrapped the lance slowly. Feathers hung from its shaft, still dusted with the clay of northern lands. The wood was carved with symbols Silas didn't understand, but he could feel their age, their weight. "This was my grandfather's," Nanton said, "and his father's before him. It has never left our bloodline. Until now." He held the lance out, both hands open. Silas stared. "This is too much," he said quietly. "No," Nanton replied, "this is exactly right." Silas took the lance. It felt alive in his grip. Not just an object, but a trust passed down through generations. One by one, the warriors stepped forward. Each pressed their palm to his chest, murmuring words he didn't understand, but somehow did. He felt them, not as syllables, but as meaning, as recognition. Brother, protector, witness. When the last warrior had passed, Nahuel raised both hands and spoke aloud. "Let it be known, from this day forward, Silas McCade walks with the Apache. His name will be sung not as outsider, but as a bridge between worlds. As a man who chose truth when lies were easy, mercy when revenge was expected." Silas felt something shift inside him. Not pride, something older, something sacred. The ceremony closed in quiet prayer, the warriors returning to their horses, mounting without haste, without flourish. This wasn't an ending, it was a continuation of peace, extended by courage and sustained by choice. Before riding off, Nanton rode his horse beside Silas one last time. "I'll see you again," he said. Silas smirked. "Hopefully not bleeding in my yard." Nanton chuckled. "I'll try not to make it a habit." They clasped hands, forearm to forearm. Not goodbye, not even farewell, just recognition. The Apache rode out like mist from the hills, quiet, certain, real. And Silas stood in the dust, war lance in hand, the wind brushing through his hair like the memory of everything that had changed.
Not just for him, for the entire territory, and for the story that would be told long after their names had faded. But has the story truly ended here? Or is this merely the beginning of a larger journey, where old wounds heal and the very definitions of family, justice, and truth are redefined? Will those who profited from war simply stand by as peace takes root? And can the fragile relationship between the Apache tribes and white settlers truly withstand the new trials that are surely yet to come? Dear reader, if you've been captivated by this tale of courage and compassion, prepare for the next chapter. Because in the less traveled corners of true Wild West stories, where the light of peace has only just begun to glimmer, the real fight for a better future still lies ahead. We believe that, like us, you'll want to know what happens next.